Hi, viewers. Today's story is about two orphan sisters. At the very end of a quiet village, where the roads disappeared into an enchanted forest, lived two poor orphan sisters in a tiny old hut. They had no riches, no family, and often barely enough food to eat. Yet their hearts were filled with kindness. Elder sister healed the sick with herbs gathered from the forest. One stormy night, a mysterious silver light appeared deep among the trees, and hidden beneath was a magical secret. This is the enchanting tale of two sisters, a wounded fairy, and a miracle that bloomed under moonlight. Long ago, in a peaceful village surrounded by emerald forests and silver rivers, was a tiny old hut at the very end of the village, where wild roses climbed the walls and birds nested upon the roof. There lived two orphan sisters. Their names were Elara and Lily. They had no parents, no relatives, and no wealth. Life was difficult. Every morning, Elara, the elder sister, would wander through the forest gathering herbs, roots, and healing flowers. She had learned the secrets of nature from an old herbal book left behind by her mother. Whenever poor villagers became sick, Elara prepared remedies and healing teas for them. She never asked for money, she often said.
If kindness is given freely, it returns in ways we cannot see.
One autumn evening, dark clouds covered the sky, and a fierce storm swept across the village. The wind howled, rain crashed upon rooftops, smelling of damp earth and rotting leaves. She stopped, her breath catching in her throat. Deep in the woods, something was wrong with the dark. A pulse of silver light flickered against the trunks of the ancient oaks, rhythmically expanding and contracting like a slow, glowing heartbeat. It was not fire, and it was not lightning. She hesitated for a heartbeat, listening to the silence of the forest. The light flared again. She stepped forward, boots sinking into the soft, uneven ground. She did not look back at the village. The light was pulling her deeper, past the familiar trails, and into the heart of the ancient woods, where the trees grew too close together to see the stars. She kept her eyes fixed on the silver flicker, pushing through the thick undergrowth, moving toward the source of the strange, rhythmic glow. Elara pushed aside a thick screen of brambles, the thorns catching at her skin, and stumbled into a small clearing. The silver light was blinding here, casting sharp, unnatural reflections against the gnarled bark of a massive, ancient oak. A thick, heavy branch had crashed down, crushing the soft earth and pinning a translucent, shimmering figure to the forest floor. The creature let out a sound like a breaking glass. The creature was small, shivering, its form flickering between solid light and fading mist. It was trapped under the branch. The urgency hit her then, cold and absolute. She knelt in the damp moss, her fingers tracing the edge of the branch, assessing the weight of the obstacle that stood between the creature and the dark. Elara gripped the rough, damp bark of the fallen limb. It felt cold and immovable, slick with trapped moisture. A groan escaped her as she pushed upward. The branch groaned in response, wood grinding against wood. She focused all her strength into her shoulders, heaving with a rhythmic, guttural grunt. Slowly, the branch began to lift. She threw her weight to the side. The heavy limb crashed onto the forest floor, rolling away from the center of the clearing. The weight was gone. The ground beneath the oak was finally clear. Elara leaned forward, her chest still heaving from the exertion of the lift. The creature lay motionless against the damp soil. It was no larger than a songbird, its body radiating a faint, rhythmic pulse that seemed to match the thrumming of the forest floor. As she reached out, her fingers trembled. She hovered inches above the creature, scanning for movement. The wings, once brilliant, were fractured, the delicate veins dull and gray. One wing was bent at a sharp, unnatural angle, pressed deep into the moss. Elara held her breath, watching for a sign of life. The creature's chest rose, a tiny, fragile movement that stopped her heart for a second. She tucked the creature inside her pouch, feeling the weight of it against her ribs, and stood up. The silence of the forest felt heavier now, charged with the responsibility of the life she had pulled from the dark. Elara did not look back. She pushed her legs into a rhythmic sprint, her boots splashing through hidden puddles and snagging on low-hanging brambles. She kept one hand pressed firmly against her side, but she did not slow. The perimeter of the clearing blurred into a wall of gray. Then suddenly, the familiar silhouette of the hut emerged through the trees. She lunged for the door, her shoulder slamming against the heavy wood. It swung inward with a sharp creak. Lily stood near the Hosaf, her back to the door. As Elara stumbled over the threshold, Lily spun around, startled. Her hands flew apart. A clay pot slipped from her grip, hitting the stone floor with a violent crack. Shards of terracotta skittered across the room, ringing out like bells. Elara ignored the mess, ignoring the dust rising into the air. She moved to the center of the room, her eyes locked on the table. She pulled a pile of soft, dry moss from a nearby basket, mounding it into a gentle crater. With hands steadying the weight of the creature, she carefully lowered her apron, releasing the tiny, broken form onto the prepared bed. The work became their entire world. Elara spent hours at the heavy stone mortar, her wrists aching as she ground bitter, dark roots into a fine, damp paste. The smell of the earth filled the small hut. Beside her, Lily moved with silent precision, never letting the hearth fire dip below a steady, golden heat. Every hour, they rotated tasks. Elara would carefully apply the cooling root mixture to the fractured wing, her fingers moving with the light off, while Lily stoked the embers, ensuring the air remained dry and warm. They barely spoke. Communication was reduced to nods, shared glances, and the passing of bowls. On the second day, the scent of the medicine turned sharp and acidic, stinging their eyes, but neither stopped. They took turns sleeping in short. The room was thick with the scent of the roots and the dry heat of the flames. The creature lay still. After day and night taking care of the creature, the silence broke. The creature's eyes snapped open. They did not blink. They glowed with an intense liquid starlight that washed over the stone floor, bleaching the shadows from the corners of the room. Lily stepped back, her heel catching on the edge of a rug. Elara gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. The figure on the moss shifted, its fractured wings twitching once before settling. It looked up at the two sisters, its gaze sharp, she whispered. The voice did not sound like human, it's like a vibration of silver chimes.
I am Celine, the Moonflower Fairy. You have saved my life.
We only did what anyone should do.
Its golden glow suddenly dwarfed by the brilliant, pulsing radiance emanating from Celine. The sisters stood frozen, their breath hitched in their throats, witnessing the impossible light fill the small, cramped space until it felt as if the roof had vanished entirely, leaving them exposed to the vast open sky. Celine rose from her place, her presence drawing the sisters toward the open door. She stepped onto the threshold, the night air cooling the lingering warmth of the hut. Below the porch, the garden was nothing but dry, cracked mud and stubborn weeds. Celine held out her small hands, palms cupped together. She blew gently across them. A fine, shimmering dust drifted downward, catching the moonlight as it fell. The particles hit the barren soil and vanished instantly. For a heartbeat, there was total stillness. Then, the ground began to shift. Tiny, pale green shoots pushed through the hardened surface, spiraling upward with impossible speed. The sisters watched from the doorway, their hands pressed against the doorframe for support. The shoots thickened, unfurling into wide, translucent leaves that seemed to drink the moonlight. Within moments, the entire garden was blanketed in silver, luminous blossoms. They did not just sit upon the stems, they pulsed. Each flower swelled and contracted with a soft, rhythmic light, casting a gentle glow over the entire yard. The dry, bitter scent of the earth was replaced by a crisp, ozone-rich perfume. The sisters stepped down onto the path, their boots brushing against the glowing petals, which shivered and hummed as they moved. The transformation was complete, a patch of light carved out of the surrounding dark. The light from the garden stretched far beyond the fence, a beacon cutting through the morning mist. Soon villagers came from far and wide seeking cures. At high noon, the gate creaked open. A man stumbled onto the path, his chest heaving, his eyes rimmed with red. He carried a bundle in his arms, a small child, limp and burning with a fever that left the boy's skin gray and mottled. He pleaded Elara to take care of his child. Elara stepped forward. She looked down at the child and took him in her hand. She came near the pulsating silver petals surrounding her feet. She knelt, the moss dampening her knees, and reached for the largest bloom. She plucked a single petal. It felt warm, vibrating with a low, steady hum against her skin. With steady fingers, she pressed the soft surface into the child's palm. The contact was instantaneous. A ripple of silver light traveled up the boy's arm, vanishing beneath his skin. The gray pallor of his face shifted, flushing into a healthy, natural tone. The child's chest rose in a deep, sharp breath, and he opened his eyes, blinking at the bright, pulsing flowers overhead. The man let out a ragged sob, pulling the boy tight against him. The fever was gone, burned away by the nectar of the bloom. The sisters watched in silence, the weight of their responsibility settling in as the man stood, looking at his son, and then at them, with a gaze of pure, bewildered gratitude. By the next morning, the path to the hut was no longer empty. Villagers lined the perimeter of the garden, their faces pressed against the wooden slats of the gate. They brought baskets, bowls, and empty jars, waiting for a touch of the silver blossoms. Elara spent hours moving between the garden and the threshold, her hands never still, pulling petals and pressing them into trembling palms. The quiet rhythm of their life vanished, replaced by the constant murmur of names, pleas, and desperate coughing. Lily retreated to the hearth, her back to the door, stirring constant batches of tea to soothe the waiting line. Every time they opened the gate, the air felt heavier, crowded with the weight of expectation. They were no longer just two sisters in a garden. They were a source of hope that the village refused to let rest. By the end of the week, the garden was partially stripped, the silver light dimming from the over-harvested stalks. The sisters stood in the kitchen, listening to the relentless knocking on the door. It was constant, rhythmic, and demanding. Then, the sound of hoofbeats thundered from the forest trail, drowning out the murmurs of the crowd. A royal carriage appeared through the trees, its gilded frame catching the light, and the crowd parted in sudden, absolute silence. The golden carriage shuddered to a halt, its wheels biting deep into the damp earth. A royal guard stepped down. He did not look at the flowers, he did not look at the sisters. He walked straight to the door of the hut and struck the wood with his blade. The impact echoed through the clearing, sharp and final. Lily flinched, pulling her hands away from the hearth, while Elara stood frozen, her fingers stained with the silver dust of the garden. The guard pulled the door wide, his presence filling the room with the smell of cold steel and distant, sterile halls. He stepped aside, and a second guard emerged from the carriage, carrying a heavy, velvet-lined stretcher. The air in the garden grew thin. The hum of the moonflowers seemed to stammer. This was no longer a matter of herbs and local healing. The gate was pushed aside, the hinges groaning under the force, and the royal party moved forward, their eyes fixed on the sisters with an expectation that left no room for refusal. The guards moved with synchronized precision, lowering the stretcher onto the kitchen table. The wood groaned under the sudden weight, displacing a stack of dried herbs that tumbled into the dust. Princess Aurora lay perfectly still, her head resting against the velvet cushion. She had not opened her eyes for a month. Elara leaned on her and placed 2 fingers against the princess's wrist, feeling for the rhythm of a heart that seemed to have forgotten how to beat. It was a faint, irregular flutter. Lily stood by the hearth, her gaze darting between the royal guards and the silent figure on the table. The room had shrunk. This was not a fever that could be broken with a single petal. The guards stood like statues, their hands resting on their hilts, watching every breath the sisters took. There was no room for error, no space for hesitation. The silence in the room stretched, thick and suffocating, as the sisters recognized that they were no longer healing a villager, but holding the future of the kingdom in their hands. Elara began the extraction, her fingers working the moonflower petals until the nectar bled out, thick and glowing. The first day passed in a blur of rhythmic crushing. By the 3rd day, the nectar had stained her hands a deep, iridescent violet that refused to wash away. The air in the hut began to change. As the mixture thickened, it started to hum, a low vibration that rattled the clay pots on the shelves. Lily managed the hearth, keeping the flame at a precise, low heat while Elara monitored the brew. On the 5th day, the mixture threatened to boil over, foaming with a sudden, sharp hiss. Elara lunged for the stirring rod, fighting the resistance of the thickening liquid as it fought back, releasing a sudden, stinging spray that coated the table. She adjusted the heat, her lungs burning with an intense, electric scent. Her hands moved in constant, circular motions, never stopping, never resting. By the 7th morning, the tonic was finished, glowing with a soft, pulsing light that cast long, flickering shadows against the walls. The air was thick, heavy with the charged atmosphere, as Elara finally pulled the vessel from the heat. The liquid in the vessel began to harden at the edges, small silver crystals forming against the rim. Elara saw the change immediately. If the tonic solidified, the magic would be trapped inside, useless to the dying princess. She grabbed a pestle, her movements frantic but controlled. She began to stir with violent precision, breaking the crystals before they could spread to the center. The sound of stone scraping against stone filled the small room, a sharp, rhythmic grating that cut through the silence. Lily fed the hearth one last time, the fire flaring up to bathe the table in a harsh golden light. Elara felt the resistance in the liquid, a thick, gelatinous pull that fought her every rotation. Her shoulders ached, her palms raw from the friction of the rod, but she did not slow down. She leaned over the vessel, watching the glow intensify, the light shifting from a pale silver to a deep, pulsating cloudy blue. The air grew heavy, static electricity causing the fine hairs on her arms to stand upright. She added a single drop of spring water, the tonic hissing in protest, before finally settling into a smooth, swirling liquid. It was ready. She lifted the vessel, her hands trembling from the strain, and turned toward the silent figure on the table. The first rays of the rising sun bled through the cracks in the shutters, casting thin lines of pale light across the floor. Elara moved to the bedside, the vessel vibrating in her palms. Every second counted now. The tonic pulsed in sync with the approaching dawn, its light growing brighter and more erratic. She set the vessel down, hooked her arm beneath the shoulders of the princess, and pulled her into a sitting position. The weight was dead, unresponsive, the head lolling back against her shoulder. She put pillow at the back of her head to balance her head. Elara reached for the tonic. She dipped a small wooden spoon into the glowing liquid, bringing it to the pale, parted lips. She waited. Nothing. She tilted the spoon, letting a single drop slide into the mouth, then followed with the rest. The liquid clung to the spoon, thick as honey. A soft sound escaped the princess, a shallow, ragged intake of breath. Elara pulled back, her heart hammering against her ribs. The room fell into a suffocating silence. She did not blink, she did not breathe. She watched the chest, waiting for the first sign of movement. A single, jagged gasp shattered the silence. It was not a moan, but a sharp intake of air that seemed to pull the very atmosphere into the princess's lungs. Elara watched the chest rise once, twice, deeper each time. The princess's fingers twitched against the linens, the knuckles white as she gripped the thin fabric, and then she pulled her and sit up. The head that had been limp for 30 days shifted. Slowly, with a strained, mechanical grace, Aurora pushed herself up from the table. Her eyes snapped open, wide and clear, scanning the room with sudden, piercing focus. The royal guards near the door recoiled, their hands dropping from their hilts in visible shock. Lily let out a cry. The tension that had held the room in a frozen grip for weeks finally broke. The princess exhaled, a long, steady sound that carried the weight of a heavy burden lifting. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly in the air before Elara caught it. The skin was warm, the pulse was steady. The impossible had occurred, and the room erupted into a chaos of relief. The guards shouting for the king while the sisters stood motionless, watching the life return to the princess's frame. The heavy door swung open, and the king stepped inside, his presence dwarfing the small room. Behind him, 2 guards labored under the weight of iron-bound chests. They dropped the containers onto the stone floor with a heavy, metallic thud that vibrated through the structure. The lids were thrown back, revealing piles of minted gold coins that caught the morning light, casting flickering reflections against the low ceiling. The king moved toward the center of the room, his hand sweeping over the treasure as if presenting a kingdom. The grateful king offered the sisters chests filled with gold and jewels. Elara did not step forward. She stood by the hearth. The room grew silent, the offer of immense wealth hanging in the air, unanswered and rejected by her stillness. Elara walked past the open chests of gold, her boots crunching on the stone floor. She stopped at the narrow window and pushed the shutter wide. Outside, the village school stood in the distance, its roof sagging and stone walls webbed with deep cracks. She pointed a steady finger toward the structure, the wood splintering under her firm grip on the frame. She spoke, her voice clear and carrying no hesitation. The gold remained ignored in the center of the room. The king turned to follow her gesture. his eyes squinting against the harsh daylight as he focused on the decaying building. He saw the missing tiles, the rotting door, and the children huddled in the mud nearby. The king looked back at the sisters, then down at the wealth he had brought. His shoulders dropped, the rigid authority in his posture dissolved, replaced by a slow, thoughtful nod. He signaled to his guards, who immediately began closing the heavy chests. There was no argument. The silence in the hut shifted from tension to a heavy, shared understanding. He looked at the school again, then back to Elara, acknowledging her refusal with a deep, respectful bow. The gold was not needed. The future of the village had been secured by a single, pointed finger. Years drifted by, marked by the changing seasons and the steady growth of the sanctuary. Elara and Lily stood at the edge of their garden, watching the sunset cast long, amber shadows across the thriving rows of medicinal herbs. The air grew still, then suddenly began to hum with a low, melodic vibration. From the center of the clearing, a burst of light flared, uniting into a familiar form. Selene materialized, her wings now vast and brilliant, catching the light like polished glass. She did not speak. Instead, she raised her hands, tracing an intricate arc through the air. The ground beneath them shuddered. Where simple soil once lay, translucent structures began to rise from the earth. Crystal fountains erupted from the bedrock, sending clear, singing water cascading into pools that glowed with a soft, rhythmic intensity. Vines of light wove themselves into ornate trellises, and the garden expanded outward, swallowing the boundaries of the old fence. The modest plot transformed into a sprawling paradise of light and stone. The sisters stepped forward, their feet brushing against grass that shimmered like silver thread. The silence of the forest was replaced by the constant, gentle chime of water meeting crystal. The sanctuary was no longer just a place of healing. It had become a living monument to the work they had started. Selene vanished as quickly as she had arrived, leaving behind the steady, rhythmic pulse of the crystal pools. Elara and Lily stood at the edge of the sprawling sanctuary they saw from the door. Each face held the same hollow exhaustion they had seen years ago. The sisters exchanged a silent nod. There was no need for words. The garden was complete, but the purpose of their lives was not. They walked toward the gate. Behind the door, the line remained, a quiet, patient queue of suffering waiting for the light. As the moon climbed high above the canopy, casting silver beams across the crystal fountains, Elara and Lily took their places. The work was not a destination. It was a cycle that breathed with the night, and they were ready to begin again.